So I'm going to bring on Katie and Allison, and we're going to head right into the panel called "What Do Women Bring to the Art of Evangelization?" And as soon as we have Christine Dalessio, I'll bring her on as well. So Susan, I'm going to turn it over to you again. Can you quickly summarize for us where we're going to go with this panel, and perhaps introduce to us Katie and Allison, and I will bring them up on stage.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you, Dominic. I don't think we've had enough conversations about the reality of what women bring to the art of evangelization. If we understand as Catholics that men and women are both human beings, we have a lot more in common than not, but we're also complementary to each other, right? We're different ways of being human, you might say. You would also think there are different ways that we approach evangelization and particular things that we're good at. So this is meant to be an encouragement and get people to think a little bit about, what some of your gifts are, and some of the things that we can work on and collaborate with our brothers in Christ in different ways. So I'm so looking forward to this conversation. I think it's going to be great.
Wonderful. Good morning, Allison. Okay. Morning, Katie. Where are you calling from?
I'm out in, I'm up, I guess, in sunny but cold Massachusetts, New England area.
All right, Katie,
I am currently on an adventure. We are in the mountains of Arizona, which is, I don't know, contradictory in and of itself, but we're about 3 hours from our house doing some skiing this weekend. And wow. Phoenix, Arizona is where we normally are.
Wonderful. Well, I will turn you all over to Susan's capable hands. For everybody who's watching, thanks again for joining us. As you have questions, go ahead and drop them in the comments, and we can work on answering those a little later in this panel. The panel is going to run for, let's see, 10:40 now till about 11:40, so about an hour. I've seen the questions that have been prepped ahead of time. It's going to be fun and fast-paced. And again, as Christine joins us, here she is. So I'll bring Christine on stage, and then I will bow back out again. So as you have questions, please drop them in the comments, and enjoy.
Okay. Thanks so much, Dominic. Hello, Allison and Katie and Christine. It's such a pleasure to be with you all here today. You bring such great insights into this question and different ones as well. So I'm so looking forward to the conversation. Listen, you all, maybe we could just spend a couple of minutes with each of you talking about, what brought you to this place. We're here at a conference on women and sharing the gospel. And I know you all have different paths here, and it would be helpful, I think, to people watching to know a little bit about those paths. So Katie, why don't you go ahead and start?
Absolutely. So my name is Katie Taylor, and I am a founder of To the Heights Ministry and a director of CatholicLink.org's YouTube channel. And so kind of my path to get here, the reality is I grew up nominally Catholic at best. My dad was an atheist and my mom was non-practicing. And so faith was definitely on the back burner of my life, but ultimately that led to a search for truth out of my own brokenness. I had tried a lot of the easy ways of the world or what was portrayed in that light, and left broken and empty. And I, through that process, ended up at the Air Force Academy, I think because I actually longed for some structure and some guidelines and some rules in my life. And so after graduating from the Air Force Academy, I served on active duty as an officer for just over 6 years, and now work with my husband in ministry. He's still active duty as a fighter pilot in the Air Force, and we have 3 little kids, a 4-year-old, a 2-year-old, and a 6-month-old. And so we are in the thick of parenting, but kind of this process of learning who I was as a woman and this expectations of wanting to fit a mold that really was masculine in and of itself. And so my experience in the Air Force, not that the Air Force or the military is sexist, but they have been leading from a masculine standpoint for generations, for decades from the start. And so as we kind of reach 40 years of women officers, we've been able to see women generals and how women can lead differently. And so our goal really in my ministry is Air Force provided millions of dollars in leadership training for me, and I want to be able to give that to other people and to take this one mold and show where women actually have an incredible ability to lead, to love, to give to the other in a way that is so necessary for society.
Okay, that is awesome, Katie. Wow. Okay, let's go ahead and move over to Christine. I'm going to step off stage just to make sure that my PC is plugged in because, of course, right? Christine, okay, you go ahead and introduce yourself. You have a really different path here too. This is
I have a very different path. So my name is Christine Dalessio, and I hold a PhD in Catholic theology. So I'm a professor at the University of Dayton, and I teach undergraduates theology, which is always interesting because a significant number of my students come in as self-proclaimed atheists or just not knowing what anything is, and usually leave with questions, which is my goal. I grew up in a sort of devoutly Catholic family that had gotten involved at some point with a charismatic renewal. A lot of those things were big questions for me when I became an adult. I moved to Germany and lived with a Protestant community for a year and was sort of the only Catholic. And that's really how I came into my own kind of mature decision-making about what it means to be Catholic, and that was something I wanted. And I did Catholic youth and young adult ministry for a parish in New Jersey for about 8 years. As I was kind of finishing a college degree, I had a dad that really did not want me to go to college. So that taught me a lot about feminism and why that was a good thing. Because obviously these are the gifts that God gave me. And there were hard decisions. And then I met this friend of mine who I eventually married, and he was the one behind the push to do what God made me to do. So here I am today being asked to talk about evangelization, which I do in a probably very different way than a lot of people in ministry, and I'm grateful to be here.
Okay, thank you so much, Christine. I'm glad that you're here. And Allison.
Well, I grew up in a Catholic home, but we only went to church for Christmas, Easter, Ash Wednesday, because for some reason my family thought that was a holy day of obligation. I just think Mom liked free stuff. And Palm Sunday, which again, more free stuff. We didn't really grow up praying together. The scriptures, the Bible didn't exist in my home. I went to catechism just because that's what everybody else did. And then I entered into young adulthood, got married at 21, and threw God out the window. Until about a year into the marriage, my husband and I looked at each other, deep in debt, completely miserable, and thought, let's try God, because we've tried everything else and nothing is making us happy. So we started to go back to church, and we did find a home there, but I was still finding a place to kind of volunteer my way into heaven. That's not a thing, but I thought it was. I was pretty sure I could volunteer my way into God's heart. I was definitely getting into God's heart, but that's not how any of this works. So doing some of my volunteer, I met this woman who said, I'm going to start a Bible study at my house, and I'd really love for you to join me. And to assure that I joined her, she bought me the book. That is an awesome way to evangelize, by the way, especially if the person you're evangelizing to happens to be from a culture that really works very well with guilt. And I am. So I had the book, and I kind of looked at her and I said, quite honestly, well, we're Catholics and we don't read the Bible. Why would we get together to discuss it? And began my journey to find out I knew nothing about the Catholic Church whatsoever. And then, St. Jerome, the whole helped writing, transcribing the Bible. Yeah, we're kind of part of this whole Bible thing. Who knew? But after about 3 years in this time together, became best friends with 4 of the other women. And they sat me down one day like an intervention. It was very strange. And they said, we have something to tell you. Kind of behind your back, we have been going to the evangelical church, and we've decided that feeds us better than the Catholic Church. And we're all leaving the Catholic Church. At first, I felt devastated because how did I miss this was going on? And I stood there unable to defend my faith. I knew nothing about it. I had still blindly been going. And so in my desire to make a decision, because I went with them to their church, and I found that we finished the first service. We went to breakfast and I wasn't eating, and they're like, "Why aren't you eating?" I said, "Well, because I got to go to mass." I knew enough to know I needed the Eucharist. And I may have missed my Catholic calisthenics a little bit. It was the only exercise I got all week. Kneel, sit, stand, kneel, sit, stand. So in my desire to really figure out why I wanted to be Catholic, I realized what they were drawn to were women who were passionate about their faith, loved the scriptures, had this amazing relationship with Jesus. And I sat in adoration one day and I kind of yelled at Jesus and I said, "We need these women in the Catholic Church. We need women who know the scriptures, who are in love of you and are passionate." And he looked me in the eye and said, "Yes, and you're going to be one of them." To which I reminded Jesus that I have an anxiety disorder. And the last thing I want to do is talk to people, like thousands of people, and stand in front of them. And he's like, "No, I've given you gifts and talents. And because you are anxious and worried all the time, then your grace will be sufficient. My grace, excuse me, his grace will be sufficient. And you will show the strength of me in what I do through you." And so here I am 10 years later with a ministry called Reconcile to You, because in all that I was reconciled to God. I now write books. I work for a national organization, WIND, Women in the New Evangelization. I also help Catholic Mom with their Instagram account. And one of my favorite little jobs I get to do, because I did ask God to give me ways to make money for my family that keeps me attached to him, and he answered me in spades. I also work for the Fall River Diocese, and one of my fun jobs is I get to work with my bishop, helping him create his blog each week. So I went from knowing nothing about the Catholic faith to being entrusted by a bishop to help him put his message and his words out. So that's me in a nutshell.
Wow. Yeah, see how different, all three of you are, but, here we are together, and that just guarantees it's going to be a great conversation. So I'm so grateful for it. Thanks for making time, ladies. Let me just go ahead and begin by talking a little bit about what evangelization is and isn't. And sort of then I'm going to ask you, it's like, what do you think women are particularly good at, in this art? Because I do think it's a bit of an art. When people hear the word evangelization, for some people, it's a really negative word because they tend to associate it with, the person, usually the guy who's on the street corner, who's yelling at people that you're going to hell and that sort of thing. It's kind of, yeah, I'm against that. It's kind of, guess what? I'm against it too. I'm not sure that's ever worked for any human being ever as a good way of evangelization. Evangelization is just simply sharing the gospel, in your own place. We've had this way of thinking of evangelization that it is to people who have never heard of Jesus Christ or know who God is. And certainly that is a big part of it. But the new evangelization that you hear tossed about also underlines that people who are cultural Catholics in particular, regardless of what country you're in, that is Catholics, but mostly they're not as deep as they could and should be. They also need evangelization, right? They need to take to heart the message that Jesus Christ wants a relationship with them through his church, and to help them grow and to make them whole and to heal them from the deep brokenness of the world that we experience in our own sin and being sinned against. All right. So it's a broad category. Catechesis is part of that, the sort of teaching piece of this. But it's just part of it, right? Evangelization tends to focus on the relationship piece. How do you open people to the teaching part of it, right? So anyway, that's evangelization in a nutshell. In all of that, because when you state it that way, I think it can mean so many things, so many different circumstances, so many ways of communicating. What do you think women really bring to the table? I know it's kind of dangerous to talk about women in like a sweeping way, but you could talk back to me about that too. I mean, are there things that women are particularly good at? And I'm happy with whoever wants to start with that.
I'll go ahead and kick it off. I think that it is dangerous to talk in that sweeping aspect, but we also need to realize that we are created differently. And so to look at from a Christian world view, from a biblical point of view, we see that God, one of the only traits he differentiated about was sex. And so he created the male and female. He didn't create haphazardly. He had a purpose and a reason for that. And to realize that women have a unique gift. And in that, and I think there's a big relearning, because the reality is society, like, we have natural gifts and then we have learned behaviors. And I have a lot of learned behaviors in especially a masculine leadership training, this idea that I can take on those traits because we do have the capacity for growth. We do have the capacity to take that next step. But the idea that women specifically, I think one of the biggest things that I see is the ability to love well. And this idea that evangelization is that relationship. And the first step, and there's a common quote that says, they don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And using the ability to be in tune with the other, to see when they need a meal, when they need help, how you can give something that is going to be a gift of yourself that ultimately is going to provide your meaning, but ultimately lead them to Christ when they see that that's rooted in your faith and your love.
Super. Okay. Ladies, Christine, Allison,
so
you want to add
when
on
I was
that?
listening to your keynote, Susan, you were talking about that moment in Mark, that the time has come. And it immediately made me think of Paul VI at the end of Vatican II, when he starts talking about now is the hour of women. That was 50 years ago plus. And we're still kind of like trying to figure out what that means and learn about that. And we kind of keep forgetting about it. So I think there is something.
Some of us aren't forgetting.
Forgetting too, but I think that, I've met a lot of people who don't know that quote exists,
Right.
And I think that was the movement of the Holy Spirit calling us to be bringers of the gospel as women. Like I do resist those sort of polarizing, ideas of, men are this way and women are this way, even though I absolutely, of course, I'm a theological anthropologist. So difference is key to unity, or it's just homogeneity, right? Like just plain and simple, there's just more of the same. So unity is a big deal. But I think part of being the hour of women is saying, well, how do I do this as a woman in a body of a woman? And for me, that often means, not that men don't also possess this, but empathy, and that ability that I think many women have, not all, to sort of just crawl into things with people, right? Like that moment at 2 a.m. where we can weep with people, not because we even understand, but because our hearts are opened. And I think that that's just a particular genius that many, many women have, and that women sort of resonate into the world. And for me, you can't have evangelization unless someone knows you're with and for them. So that's really kind of the key factor for talking about like women, Yeah.
No, I like that a lot. Crawling into their mess. Yeah. There's definitely something to that. Allison, how about you? What do you
just do it so naturally without giving it the word evangelization, right? We're natural inviters. Like that woman at my church was evangelizing to me, the new evangelization, because we both knew Jesus, and inviting me into book club, inviting me into her home, into Bible study, was really this amazing start for, she had no idea what God had planned, but her invitation to me was truly what I needed to start to learn more about God. So it's that simple invitation, I think. And I think that's where women, that hospitality, like I don't have that hospitality gene. Like I am no Martha. I am so like, when that group broke up and God said, now I want you to be the inviter, I was like, Lord, you've seen me bake. Like that woman kept me going every week because she made the best cookies and guacamole that you could ever have in the world. So even when I was unsure about who God was, I was going back for the snacks. See, and he knows our heart. Like, all right, heart, you don't just win men through their stomachs. I'm right there. Like, give me a cookie and I'm your friend for life. but we have that gift of hospitality. So even though I don't bake or cook, I do have that feminine genius that wants to invite you in, that wants you to experience the goodness of God. And so I think we really just do it naturally when we use our feminine gifts of hospitality, invitation, and just that desire to connect, where we're made relational, right? Adam is made from ground. Eve is made from the man, from his side, relational. His first relationship is with God, and women's first relationship is with God, but with another, with man. So I think we're automatically relational, and that's how we can come about evangelizing very naturally.
Yeah, I like that, Allison. Thank you so much. And you know what? I want to just point out to the three of you who are here on the panel, if you wanted to like talk back and forth to each other, don't wait for me. I mean, just do it, okay? Otherwise, I'll ask questions and you'll go in line, but it would be great if we could pretend like this is a round table as much as we can and just have the conversation. And for those of you who are viewing right now, if you wanted to go to the chat and you have a question that you want to pose to any one of these people or me, or just a general question to the whole panel, I'll keep an eye on that. I'd love to see it. But we've got other things that we can keep going on for sure, and we will. Just putting that out there. Use the chat because that's why it's there. That's what makes it fun. All right, so we've got these gifts, and I would have named a lot of the things that you all just named as well. I think the relational piece is big. I think hospitality tends to be a strength with many women. A kind of leadership and a willingness to sort of get into the muck, honestly, with people, to meet people where they are, to have, the difficulties, not being scared by it, not being the fixer-upper, honestly, in the immediate.
Yes.
The listening piece. Yes, I know. Everybody's like, yep, amen. Okay, we're not the fixer-uppers in the first 5 minutes. Not that I'm saying men are, but often they are.
Or they try.
No, we need both. We need both. But you know what? People also need to be heard. And you know what I would have added to this was a lot of women do seem to have a real talent for listening. Right. And listening is a big part of evangelization. I know I talk to parishes all the time where they're saying, give me the words. And I say, you give me the ears and you'll have the words. It's a lot about listening to where that other person is at and what they really need. And then God will give you the words. I mean, we could practice and, talk about some better and worse things to say for sure. But listening is huge. And women do tend to be naturally pretty good at it. So we've got all these gifts. Now I'm going to ask the question on the other side. What do you think prevents women from engaging perhaps a little more deliberately in sharing the gospel? Is there anything? Because I think there must be. I wish I had a few more evangelists in my area that I could work with, and I'm working on that. But right now, we're kind of the leading edge in the United States. It's not a common thing to talk about being Catholic and evangelist. Like Allison, when you were saying it's like Catholic Bible, who knew? I'm in this kind of Catholic evangelization. Who knew? Moment with a lot of people. So, what prevents women from doing that? What do you think? And anybody who wants to.
I grew up in a generation where I'm like one generation away from that. You talked about nothing political, nothing financial, nothing spiritual. You just didn't talk about it. So I had no role models. I had nobody to show me how this works. And now I think I'm older than these two beautiful women. So maybe they have a different experience, but that was basically the number one block for me, obstacle, was that you just were told you just don't talk about this. Like, that's private. That's for you, between you and God, and you keep that to yourself.
Absolutely. Both really good points. Okay, Christine,
I think
what do you think?
That makes a lot of sense to me. That's not necessarily my experience. I'm not sure I'm much younger than you, but Gen X fans a whole. Anyway, we are huge. Okay. We are huge. I actually think if we look at the question of why women don't do this, I see two issues. One of them is because there's these men doing it and being paid to do it. And on every poster that there's 6 men on a poster with 1 woman maybe. And I'm getting really tired of the tokenism in Catholicism, but that's a totally different, like there's something that's not working in the way people with the resources are noticing the talents of women and helping us to collaborate well. And we need help, in those kinds of situations. So there's something not right, I think. I think for women, though, when I read this, I sort of am thinking about this question right away is, in like 5th grade, when you sort of learn that there are mean girls and you have to do what it takes to fit in, like your hair is, you have to have your hair braided right, or you have to wear those shoes. I think those are outside. I don't think those are interior lessons. I think those are outside lessons that society has sort of helped us interiorize. And so even as adults, there can be fear that happens that, what if I upset somebody? What if I break off this great friendship I have of going to coffee with somebody? These kinds of things. And I think on the one hand, relationships help cure that. They give us those trust moments that help us grow more confident. But I think on the other end, I know a lot of women who really feel stuck because they don't want to ruin a good thing by bringing in Jesus or something like that, because they're kind of afraid of what the mean girls will do or if they'll still belong. And I think for a lot of women, and sometimes myself included, I tend to be less like that, but sometimes for sure, navigating those waters can be really tricky because we learned them 20 years ago, Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So I hear some commonalities there in terms of, a lack of models, but a plenty of modeling of how to be quiet, even about things that are really important. I am looking at the chat here, and Mary Jo Rennert, who's also speaking in the conference later, so go hear her talk, is saying something really similar to what you're saying, Christine. It's kind of like, there's culturally many women don't want to risk disapproval or rock the boat. And frankly, I mean, this is the case with men too. Maybe there's a flavor of this that is different with women. Maybe we have a little more to lose, possibly, and I think the internality between how women relate to each other is sometimes really, really positive and sometimes not, so thank you, Christine. Katie.
I think Susan just I'll share the millennial. I think as a society, we have gone to even a higher level of surface. And so if I'm constantly only presenting the surface level and comfortable there, and I want to look perfect, and I want my Instagram to look right, my Facebook to look right, and I want this image that I'm sharing to be this perspective of I've got it all together. Not that I'm a hot mess that needs God, because that's the reality, but I have it all together. And then when our insecurity builds up, that ability to relate and to open up in a depth to share the deepest parts of us, our spirituality, our God who dwells within us, that to share that side takes a depth of relationship that society is moving further and further from naturally. And then the idea of not wanting to rock that boat. I think women are still clamoring for like where they belong in society, and trying to fit in has been our model. And so it's incredibly dangerous when I don't think society wants to do this, but the reality has been the way the feminist movement has worked has not been equal but different. It has been the same. I will be the same. And when we strive to be the same, it comes into that mean girl-esque of wanting to like fit every part of me into the specific mold that has to look this way. And that doesn't include faith today. And that reality of how do I step out in a place that I am in fear, that I do have insecurity, I do have identity issues. And I think there are a lot of scars, which I think we'll continue to dive into, but I can relate to Allison on having the anxiety disorder and what that impact is. But the reality is 1 in 4 women do. And so if that is the statistic and that's the society that we're living in, if 25% of women are anxious to a disorder standpoint and feel shut down, there is a great barrier in opening up to the other, into that relationship. in a depth that allows for true evangelization.
Yeah. Katie, it almost sounds like we need a God, who has a healing ministry.
Amazing. Yes, I know. When you were talking in the keynote about the first healer, it's the people who are first healed or the first evangelizers. I just think that is so true. And when we experience that healing, it's the ability to go in and to evangelize in that.
Yeah. Yeah. And, it's something really interesting. Back when I was in grad school, we had this little corner of our school where there was an open board and people had sort of like this running statement and you kind of agree, disagree. It was kind of fun. Okay, so I this was next to a bookstore that I worked in, so I was able to keep tabs on this. And somebody wrote up there Friedrich Nietzsche's piece, "Whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger." And the thing that was most fascinating about this was that I noticed all of the men who were at my school looked at that and like, well, I'm not a fan of Nietzsche. I mean, they were getting PhDs in theology, but it's like, but on the other hand, that statement, yeah, whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Sure. Yes, I agree. Every single woman said no. Mm-hmm. And it was one of those moments like, whoa, I didn't see that one coming. But I think there is an awareness. Women do have this awareness of woundedness, right? And that you can heal enough to go on and Jesus can provide that healing. But the wound at some level, it becomes part of you, right? It's not as simple as whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger. It's feels almost like an achievement-oriented statement. And it's like, whatever doesn't kill you is something that you have to deal with sometimes for a long time. Yeah. So, if we want to encourage women to share the gospel, more readily and with joy, making sure that our cup is full, right? That we're going to the Lord, that we're active in the sacraments, that we are supporting each other, as fellow disciples is a really important piece of that. Yeah. Okay. Ladies, I was wondering if there was anyone in your history who actually was a good model for you for this. Do you have somebody who's an inspiration, who's a female sharer of the word? Maybe not someone would specifically think of as an evangelist, but maybe we need to expand our understanding of evangelization. Who models this for you? Who do you go back to, at least in your mind, if not in person, and say, yeah, I hope I can really be seen as being kind of like that myself, but really inspired by her? Anybody?
I'll answer that. I should say I have somebody that I think of that models it in actions, and women who model it in words. Their actions too, but in high school, I made friends with a girl whose mom was devoutly Catholic. And one of the things, she modeled it by her actions. At 9 o'clock every night, no matter what we were doing, she would excuse herself, go to her prayer corner, and she had the stack of prayer cards, and she'd pray her rosaries. And if you stayed at her house on Saturday night, you were expected Mass either Saturday night or early Sunday mornings, no exception. You couldn't stay there. I call her my seed planter, and sadly, we just lost her about a month ago. But she left a legacy that she probably doesn't even realize. I've told her enough times, but I don't think she realized how deeply that legacy was, because it inspired me to want what she had. And now I hope I'm doing that for others. And for the women who kind of made it available to me by mentors, by word, were people like Lisa Hendy and Danielle Bean and Maria Johnson, and Kelly Walquist, founder of Wine, who didn't just model it by being out there, but were kind enough to see when I was starting to reach out to me, to answer my emails, to really mentor me. And Katie, when you were speaking earlier about being that mentor for other people, I thought, they couldn't get a better role model, because you also are a huge inspiration to me. I'm this small Catholic world. I'm actually have connected with Katie through women's ministry, through wine, and she really is just, you really got it going on, girlfriend.
Thank you. Thank you. My Facebook time hop told me that it was 2 years ago this weekend that I actually met Allison, which is really cool to be able to connect again. Although sadly not in person. But the idea of, I think when we do look at different people and different skill sets, I am going to pull a saint. I'm going to pull Saint Therese of Lisieux, who I think shows maybe a different way of evangelizing when, she is a doctor of the church and she is the patron of missionaries, but yet she never left the cloister. And how is that possible? And to realize again that women can love well and be perceptive of the things around us. And so to show this little way that every little action I do can point someone to Christ. And so when we talk about the art of evangelization, I really think of Pope Benedict talked about the idea that to evangelize is to teach the art of living well. And I think that this idea of she shows these little ways that we can draw people into Christ, and to not make it so intimidating, especially at the initial conversion point, because quite frankly, my life is scary at this point. I'm just too far out there. And so this, showing that it can literally be bringing a meal to somebody. Step of evangelization. You don't have to necessarily be the one in front of the camera, although I think that there is great gifts in learning to teach and learning to share is ultimately going to grow your faith. But that those little things that you can do matter. And women, especially in motherhood, so much of our faith is hidden, and our gifts are our little sacrifices are not seen. And so to realize that these are actually steps towards evangelization, because they're purifying me and they're affecting those that are most directly under my need to love on. If I fail to evangelize to my children, well, then I should have given up the ministry a long time ago. But the idea of, if I'm not loving on them first, and all of those little steps are not seen. The fact that I was nursing my child right before this started and giving to her isn't a public service. And so much of our society is leaned towards that I think St. Therese really speaks into what women are doing on the day-to-day hidden level. The actions, I will also list another friend, Allison, of ours, is Michelle Nash. I am always inspired because she evangelizes in a very different way than I do. And the Holy Spirit and her ability to listen and to step out in confidence and not consider it and look at somebody's credentials or resume or nope, I had one interaction with you and you're hired and we're going to go this direction. And I truly believe the Holy Spirit knows where this is going. And I think that that's such a beautiful difference in just trust in the Lord, an immediate willingness to step out that I love watching and engaging with in a very loud and beautiful way.
Nice.
For me,
yeah, I'm reminded when you were talking, Allison, sorry, not Allison, Katie, that I think G.K. Chesterton said God gives us the saints that we need for any given age, right? And it's really intriguing how Therese de Lisieux was such a really outsized saintly influence on the 20th century. And I would argue still going into it today, especially given her circumstances, right? So I think you articulate really well. It's maybe she was really raised to sainthood and prominence precisely so we can remember the small things count for a whole lot. Because we live in a world that really values and pays attention to the big things. Media has just boomed during the 20th century and beyond. Christine, how about you? Do you have any models, any female models in your life?
It's sort of a fraught question for me, which I didn't expect it to be, because I do keep going to the saints And I mean, you know, I think that that's also telling that I can't easily just name 5 women who I talk to on a weekly basis that do, you know, that model this in any way. Although, Lord forbid, there are a million women probably who have influenced me, but I like the saints who are obnoxious. So, and by that, I mean, and my doctors of the church are, you know, Hildegard, who's like, get me my own place. And Catherine, who's like, we're leaving and preaching anyway. And Teresa, who's like, thanks, God, you just knocked me off a horse again. Like those women, right? And Mary Magdalene, who just wouldn't shut up, which is, I love these women. And they are the ones who inspire me because they didn't, and my, you know, my patron for almost everything is Joan. They weren't afraid of doing what nobody was doing. And I think that evangelization in the 21st century looks a lot different from most of those things. And obviously being able to be scholarly and all that kind of stuff is part of, like, words are a thing. But I think for me, there's sort of a combination of going into the expected places, like the Catholic Church, and not being what I'm supposed to be, and just being who God's inspiring me and calling me to be. That I draw strength from these women for that, you know, to just say, like, I don't fit this mold. Yeah. I'm not going to fit this mold. It's really scary to not fit the mold sometimes. But that's where the strength, that's where I draw strength from those women, over and over and over again, I think.
Yeah. No, that's great, Christine. I mean, actually, your Saint Posse is very similar to my Saint Posse, to be honest. I mean, I know one of the line that's at least attributed to Joan of Arc is, I'm not afraid, I was born to do this. So I keep reminding myself of that.
Me too.
Yeah, amen. No, these are good. These are all excellent.
I love that list, just because I think we get this idea that holiness looks a certain way.
Yes.
And the idea that we have to fit the one look, and how intimidating that was in my discernments, in how that infiltrated making decisions of what I was going to do career-wise, what I was going to do family-wise, what I was going to do vocationally, and all of those decisions, realizing that holiness can look different, that we are all on the path, and do that in our own beautiful, unique way.
I mean, honestly, for me, you know, because I've worked with the next generation of women and the one after that, and men as well, because this is not a conversation that just belongs to women. But I think that men have such a unique opportunity to finally start learning from women, because they'll learn things they haven't learned before. And so through teaching and through the ministry I was doing with youth and young adults, like, one of the conclusions I've come to is that holiness is not that sort of pristine pastel holy card. I mean, that may be true, but it's really about, I'm saying it again, but it's really about the mess. Like, holiness is the ability to live in the mess and still know that Christ is with me and is the Lord of the mess, because I'm always going to have a mess. I always need grace, and the people around me and the society around me is always going to need grace. And this is a weird side thing, but I'm going to say it. So I'm very old and a Gen Xer, and I'm a gamer. So which means I play an online game that 15 million people in the world play, which is weird. But the small circle, and during pandemic, I'm particularly isolated. So this has been really become a community for me. And I'm finding out quickly, not only that this is predominantly a circle of atheists, but actually anti-religious folks who are younger than I am. And it's been an eye-opener. And I kept saying to my husband, I can't even bring up, they know I'm Catholic and they know I'm a theologian, and they've told me they have no idea what that means. And I've told them a little, but that's it. That's as far as we can go. But he kind of reminded me, you know, whatever situation you're in and whatever conversation you're in, you're bringing Christ with you. So they may have no idea what that is, but it is still Christ with you. And so it is very much, and sometimes walking right into the mess and just trying to rely on the grace of that. And that's evangelization too. Even though we can't get to the point of talking about Christ yet, Christ is still present, So I think messes are really important. It's not that whitewashed thing.
Yeah. Wow. The chat is exploding, I should say, at this point. And thanks to Allison, who's, sort of peppering this, like, hey, you all out there, share your saints too. Share the women who have influenced you too. I've just got to name one of them because I didn't even know she was going to be here, but this is my aunt, Sister Judith. And Dominic said, Sister Judith. It's like, I didn't even make the connection. So, hi. And she named my grandmother. It's like, her mother, my grandmother. But lots of people just bringing up all kinds of real possibilities here. This was not on the list of what I was going to share, but it seems like it's moving this way because we are talking about saints a lot here. What about Mary? I mean, and I'm going to share a little bit here. And I'm talking about Mary, the Mother of God. There are lots of Saint Marys out there. There are. But, I know at least some women who have been, a little more challenged by that precisely because of, I think, what you said, Katie. Mary sort of gets boxed into one particular type of holiness, and we seem to forget the full humanity of this incredible woman. So people sometimes see a particular depiction of Mary and it's kind of like, well, I know you're the Mother of God, but I just don't feel all that connected because it's not where you're at, right? So I don't know, maybe we can talk a little bit about that. I mean, Mary was, I guess in other ways, the other first evangelist, right? It's like, how does she inspire, or how could she inspire women and men, but I guess especially right now, women, in sharing the gospel?
I came to Mary kind of a backwards way. I realized, well, first Mary to me was just the statue that my mom had on her hope chest, like this perfect Lady of Grace porcelain pawn in God's game, right? Like this is how I grew up seeing her. And then as I started to come back to the faith, I recognized that the people drawing me closer to Jesus all had these amazing encounters with Mary that changed them forever. Like many of our sacramentals, our devotions, they all came from these people, ordinary people like myself, who had extraordinary encounters with Mary and who brought them closer to Jesus. So I decided just recently to start to investigate who Mary is and to get to know her and realize she was no like lilting lily. Like she was strong and intelligent and made decisions based on faith, but wisdom and the Spirit and the grace. Like being full of grace is really important. And I did not know that. Grace is the undeserved yet freely given gift of God's Holy Spirit within us. That's abundant. And she was full of it. So we need to also, she wasn't really full of it. That come out right. But
all the good stuff, yeah.
Which kind of awakened me to see that she was an important part of all of our faith journeys. So I've just recently made her acquaintance.
Awesome. Others?
I do think it is getting over the perfect and the idea that she is so unrelatable. And I think like meditating on her 7 sorrows, or the idea that she, yes, had this infused grace, but she is able to relate in the fact that she could have said no at any single moment. And just as Eve did, Eve chose to say no. And Mary and Eve did not have the stain of original sin. Mary did not have the stain of original sin, and she chose to say yes over and over again. I have a coffee mug that I didn't know that I would love when I was first given it. It's by Rose Herring, and it says Fiat on it. And I just like, when I drink my coffee in the morning and I think of my own Fiat, my own yes that I have to give, nice. I love it. And this idea that I get the opportunity to say yes to the Lord today. And that might look like unloading the dishwasher with a smile on my face. And it might look like going and changing the 7th poopy diaper, or like sending 15 work emails and having magnanimity in that. A desire for excellence is the virtue. And I think when we look at all of our little tasks as an opportunity to say yes, and then go to Mary in the fact that she somehow miraculously did that her entire life, which I'm not at, to be honest. And so she was in the mess and was able to say yes. And I want to be able to do that. And so to tap into that grace and into that role model is definitely where Mary stands for me today, as an example of how I live out the feminine genius in my little yeses.
I think for me,
Awesome.
I think that's great, because that yes is such a, God had called me years ago to do this PhD, and it definitely was God's voice, which isn't something I really throw around that lightly. And I remember praying, and I had to swallow this one hard, praying to have docility to the will of the Holy Spirit, which these are not words I use. So that was really an important moment for me. But it really came, I think, from having done sort of that. For me, it's sort of this research, right, about Mary. And I remember, because the porcelain Mary doesn't cut it for me at all. She's almost disembodied in most of these statues. And that's a problem in my imagination. But I remember looking at the statue we had in our chapel in the parish where I was working, and it's the one where there's, she's standing on the firmament, and there's a snake, right? And so actually this is a million years ago. It's the first blog post I ever wrote was about Mary, the snake slayer, because I think there was a problem for me that we were looking at, this is like Mary, the porcelain, perfect, beautifully touched up, wearing the cloak of stars. And I mean, from a sci-fi perspective, like the cloak of stars is really cool, appeals to my imagination on different levels. But it's the flipping snake, right? Like she's standing on the snake, she has crushed the snake, and then that overturns like the snake biting at woman's heel, and like just the power of that, like the sheer reality of her being able to channel what God's will, And so I think for me, the one thing was getting over, I still can't relate to porcelain Mary, but I've started filling my home with images of Mary that are different and striking and have a reality and an unreality that kind of seems right to me for the Mother of God and this woman who said yes. But also for those women, I've encountered a lot of young women, especially young women, and I had this too, who have conflicts with their own mothers. So this idea of Mary as mother, sometimes it's, so I had a bad relationship with my mom, so Mary's my mother, and that's great. But the other one, which is, I have a bad relationship with my mom, so I can't get there with Mary. I don't know what this looks like. And maybe from some things I've read, but definitely been able to say to some of them, but can you imagine Mary as your sister? And usually that's a start for a lot of people who can say yes. I'm like, you'll get to mother then. You'll get there, but maybe just as like your older sister, because there's something more tangible and less conflictual about that for some women. And I think, Mary offers herself to us as our sister in the body of Christ anyway, So I think sometimes that it's really important, if Mary's going to be our model, that we come to her in a way that we can. Yeah.
I think that's beautiful.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Christine. Yeah, I just had one thing that I want to add to this, because I think this is another question where we can keep going. But I do some work with St. Paul Street Evangelization, which there's a story behind that too. And that's actually our next panel in the afternoon. So come back for that, because we're going to have tons of great stories. Deb McManaman and Denise Hurl are regional missionaries. And oh my gosh, this is so much fun. People don't realize how much fun street evangelization is. But St. Paul Street Evangelization really focuses on handing out rosaries, right? There is a kind of Marian twist to this, just in terms of first approach. And when I was first aware of this, I thought, it's like, is that really the first thing you want to do? I mean, don't you want to talk about Jesus first? Because Mary, I grew up in the South, and, There are people with issues with Mary, okay? Some of our Southern Baptist brothers and sisters in Christ really have issues with Mary, and they would let me know about it all the time. So really, is that our lead? But, they convinced me on this because, people, especially outside of the Catholic Church, but also fallen away Catholics who tend to be the people who come to the table, right? Who are sort of intrigued and want to figure things out. It's like, what are you about here? What are you doing? People are intrigued by Mary, right? And when you talk about Mary, you can talk about, it's like, this is a woman who was willing to open her entire life and make her entire life an arrow towards Jesus Christ, right? And she didn't lose anything in that. She was supremely fulfilled in that. But the intrigue in, the role of Mary, in the role of our salvation is high. I mean, I've seen it. So just something to think about, if you are a woman or a man joining us and, are challenged by some of the depictions of Mary that we've received, I just encourage you to go out and sort of look beyond the porcelain, right? For me, Our Lady of Guadalupe is a really super powerful image of Mary that I love and sort of changed my mind about everything. So just throwing things out there. All right, folks, I'm keeping an eye on the time here. I think we have about 6 more minutes or so. So why don't we go ahead and close out by talking about something that I want to make sure that we at least touch on, and that is some of the particular challenges that women face. Okay. And there are lots, and I named some of them before our panel, in case there's like, well, what type of challenges? You can name your own, I don't care. But what kind of challenges do women face that we can really try to introduce Jesus Christ into that challenge? How can we do that for ourselves and for others? Anybody have thoughts on that?
I do think that there is a beauty in realizing that as women, we need to be speaking to other women. And so there are topics that become and have taboo for a man to speak into, especially when we look at pretty much anything under theology of the body, because my reproductive organs are different than your reproductive organs, and vice versa. I think that when men speak to other men about porn, it is way more powerful than me telling them, and that there is something in there of being able to say, I love natural family planning, and it has led to my healing, and it is beautiful. And to say, oh, but that's not what I've been taught, like this expectation. And I was on birth control at age 12, and having that influence into my life that this was the norm, it was one of the last things I let go of. That it was like, I don't quite trust on this one. I'll just keep, I'm going to go to daily mass, but I'm sure going to keep on my pill. And there's just this, I needed women to speak into that, to show me the beauty of what was possible in sexuality specifically. And I think the idea of being able to speak into, I have a sexual assault history that led to a PTSD and anxiety diagnosis, that ultimately I needed a woman's testimony. I needed to see that somebody, again, that holiness didn't have one look, and that it didn't have to be perfect, that mess was an area that Christ was able to come into and to give healing in, and that she didn't have to have it all together already to already be proclaiming to me and to be sharing her testimony that God still loved her, and there was a dignity there, and there was healing that was possible, and there was change that was possible. And I think having had women that spoke into those areas of my life really mattered. I think when it comes to miscarriages, that empathy that we started off with is the idea to be able to sit down next to the other, like Jesus did with the death of Lazarus. He sat down beside Mary and he wept. He knew he was going to raise him. He knew the glory that was in heaven awaiting him. And yet he came and sat and wept with. And I think when we have infertility, when we have miscarriages, and then I think abortion needs to be spoken about by women, that needs to be handled with love. Because yes, there is truth there, but the reality is if we're not loving that person, and especially the person who has already had the abortion, to facilitate their healing. to not condone and shove away, but to go and say, we can heal all things. Like, our God is a God of miracles that can redeem this, that can make beauty out of the disastrous mess that we've each gotten ourselves into in our own ways, in our own sin and our own fallenness.
Katie, I just want to thank you for your vulnerability in that and sharing that with us. I think you're absolutely right. There are a number of challenges where women really are going to hear best from other women who have been through it and don't have their act entirely together, because honestly, who does? But we're getting better, and it's because of God. And we can say that, and that's real, and that's impactful. Christine, how about you?
Yeah, thank you, Katie. That was really beautiful. And I think vulnerability is a real key that a lot of women seem to know how to tap into, but it's still scary. So I really appreciate that. I'm a theological anthropologist. I'm a scholar of the theology of the body. This is sort of speaks to me, this idea of embodiment. So I think that especially anything that has to do with being a female body in the world is almost only and always best addressed by women, because it's always so secondhand or third hand if it's a different kind of body. John Paul II talks about being two different kinds of bodies. And so all of those things, I myself, I've been married 25 years. We don't have children. We wanted children. God had a different idea for us, but it took me a long time to get to there. And that sort of is part of the reason that I am doing what I'm doing now, and that I've been able to work in the church. But there have been women, actually for me, especially through academia, there have been women who've said to me, you say things very well. You connect things really well. I had a woman say to me, where are you going for the PhD? When I had never said that out loud to anybody. So for me, it was women being able to speak to my gifts that I couldn't see because I was still sort of dealing with, this isn't where I thought I was going to be, and what does God want for my life, And so that might seem kind of a funny thing, but I don't think men saying that to me would have done it, right? And so I think there's something about women being attuned to other women and to who they are and to what they need to hear as women because I'm a woman. So it's not just on the receiving end, but also on the giving end, right? Just trying to be attuned to one another and be able to say, hey, I'm a woman and I've been living in this woman's body as a woman for a long time and I know stuff, like for me, as I get older, I feel a little bit like elder or something, in that way. And the church needs that so much.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It's beautiful, Christine. Allison, I'm going to ask if you have anything to share with us. We're also running really late on time, so maybe like in 1 minute, all the challenges we can bring Jesus into.
And I've typed it in there. Women need to recognize and realize they are fully healed through Jesus Christ. That even if you have a fatherhood issue, which we talked about with Mary, motherhood, that's even more stronger with fatherhood, with God feeling unconditional love. It's asking God to let him love you. And then as St. Paul says, and it kind of goes to what Katie was saying earlier and a little bit of what Christine is saying too, that the scriptures say, whatever God has comforted you in through Christ Jesus, he will then use you to comfort others in. That's where women need to be speaking, where they've been comforted. That makes them the authentic witness to speak truth into another person's heart. And that's the best way to evangelize, not by rules and regulation, but by authentic witness. What has God done for you?